although Pennsylvania is coming back in, right now we have it up here on the screen, odds are 57-43 in terms of poly market. That's a little bit in from when they were 63-39 back on October 22nd, 2 days ago. But what has the polling done? Did Democrats make a mistake getting rid of Biden?
All you timeless children with your predictions and flashbacks, trying to get ahead. What makes you think I can see you? What makes you think I believe you? Dreams inside my bed. Have you heard this lately? Music stepping up waiting, shot has come to pass. All the dreams were flying, all the thoughts are dying. Heard something fast.
This is the Prediction Trade. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Chris Vecchio, joined, of course, by my co-host, Jeff Joseph, where we explore what's happening in political betting markets each week. This week, we're joined by a special guest, a friend of mine, Cameron Koob. Cameron's joined us from Manhattan today. He has previously worked on Tom Steyer's campaign, Need to Impeach. He's helped Democrats get onto the presidential ballot in 55 states and territories. He's likewise done a number of fact-checking and opposition research efforts from the state to national level, and he's a straight shooter. So he's here to join us on the Prediction Trade to tell us what this rise in Trump odds the past week is all about. Cameron, Jeff,
Thanks,
it's
Chris.
good to see you guys.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate you having me on. I'm happy to get into it.
Good to have you, Cameron. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah. I mean, as a Democrat, not too chuffed about recent news, but I think that there are some things to be optimistic about.
Well, let's talk about that. What seems to be triggering you in terms of recent news?
Well, I think that, there was obviously an unprecedented change at the top of the Democratic ticket. And while Democrats, by and large, are happy to be supporting Kamala Harris across the board, there is a significant depression in the polls that people are seeing. I was expecting this to come. Things always tend to equalize, whether it's a bad debate or a really good one or a huge fundraising haul or an assassination attempt. They tend to equalize, especially when you're this close to an election. So I think that as the Democratic Party begins to reckon with that reality, there are some significant growing pains we're seeing in public opinion, and it just reinforces that this is an extremely close election, that Donald Trump has a lot of support, but that support is going to turn out, and that this is anything but a done deal.
Jeff, I mean, we can start at the macro level here because I think a number of people in this country, they don't really trust the polls. They don't really trust media right now. And so they've turned to things like the betting market to check in on the wisdom of crowds. Cameron, Trump's odds have surged here in recent weeks, right? You talk about being chuffed by the polls. Yeah. The betting markets are giving Trump basically a 3-5, maybe a 2-3 chance, depending upon where you look at winning this election. Is that accurately reflecting what you're seeing in the polls these days?
Yeah, I think the betting markets are a really important tool to understand public opinion too. I mean, you'll see that they've been correct in the vast majority of elections where they're available, to a large swath of people. And I look at them regularly because I think that they are a really excellent expression. That said, I do think that they are a significant exaggeration because you look at, 2016, they had Hillary winning, pretty significantly. In 2020, they had Biden winning, by a significant margin, and he did, but he didn't win by the same margin that, the odds really gave him. The odds are speculative, and as people know, they're in some sense trying to capitalize on what someone thinks or feels sure is going to happen. So I think that they can be unscientific in that way. So I wouldn't trust the exact margins of any odds, as opposed to looking at the general shift. So as you see the odds increasing for Trump, this was really concerning news to me because, as a Democratic voter, because I'm seeing his chances effectively increase in a way. And I know what direction public opinion is moving, in a sense. The zeitgeist is beginning to acclimate to the idea of him winning. And I don't think that means that that will ultimately be the outcome, but I think it's indicative of how energy in the election is moving, and that expresses itself in terms of, anything from job numbers to ad blitzes to Kamala Harris going on Call Her Daddy.
Well, we've been trying to get one of the candidates onto this podcast, Jeff, but they're too busy going into the swing states, which, that's really what we want to talk about here today, Cameron, because these polls that have been coming out in the swing states in recent days, if it's from Bloomberg or New York Times, even Trafalgar Group, everything is a point or two or three, one way or the other. Most of these polls are within the margin of error right now.
Yeah.
I think the big takeaway that a lot of people have had, though, is that at this point in the cycle in 2016 or 2020, perhaps this is what the betting market's reflecting, Trump's running well ahead of where he was in either of the past two presidential cycles.
Yeah.
So I wonder, if reflecting on the conversation, Jeff, that we had with Robert Cahaley from the Trafalgar Group, he talks about the social desirability bias. He thinks that there were shy Trump voters out there in previous cycles. So are we done with the shy Trump voter? What's going on that now we're seeing them run so neck and neck? Is this the omen that Kamala Harris is done and really this isn't that close of a race?
Yeah, well, my alma mater is not known for a lot of things. Franklin and Marshall, it's a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, but what it is known for is actually one of the best polls of Pennsylvania politics. And its architect, Terry Madonna, was someone I used to chat with a lot, especially in the lead up to the 2016 election. And he, in the lead up to that election, had a lot to say about how he thought polls were deficient at reaching the electorate as a whole. The fact that they couldn't really reach a lot of people who were reliant on their cell phones. They were mostly reliant on landlines at the time. There was an enormous reckoning after the 2016 election to deal with the fact that they hadn't been talking to the people who were coming out to vote for Trump, because these people were not what we consider super voters like you and I, but who vote in every primary, every local election. They're people who hadn't voted in any election in maybe as many as 20, even 50 years. And they came out just for Donald Trump, or they registered because of Donald Trump. And so, there were a lot of shy Trump voters, but they were also just not included in the model. They just weren't considered. And so pollsters made a lot of efforts through wading through new methods of outreach to correct against this. And then, we saw a change in 2020 where Biden was dramatically underestimated in some ways. We really didn't see Georgia coming. And on top of that, in 2022, Joe Biden, despite being notably very unpopular for a sitting president, was actually able to shepherd the party to the best midterms in an objective sense for a sitting president since JFK, which is a really powerful statement about how the polls are looking. Now, if you look at the accuracy of the polls in 2022, it was a lot better. But I think that you've seen a progressive correction each cycle to try and meet where the bias occurred last time. Now we're in a situation where text voting, I'm sure you both have received texts asking you to answer some form of poll today. I have received about 3 or 4, I think. And, this constant onslaught of outreach is really indicative of a mini election in some ways. It's kind of a microcosm. So I think that what you're seeing is actually an exaggeration of the turnout disparity between Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives.
Precisely with respect to early voting. I think that's what's probably sending off alarm bells. I know Mark Penn was pretty public yesterday in saying that based on early voting numbers, if things maintain the current pace of the Republican turnout in early ballots, as of today, I just checked a moment ago, there's 26.8 million votes that have been cast through early voting of the 54 million votes requested. And considering party registration numbers, the ratio of Republican early votes cast relative to Democrats is higher, materially higher. Is that the source of the anxiety right now? And is that the source of the divergence between the polling markets and the prediction markets, in your opinion?
I think it's a definite factor. I think the increase in Republican early voting, Republicans have done a complete about face on early voting as an institution. in recent months and the past year. And, it's been to their benefit and to their credit to do that because, their voter base is increasingly aging in rural areas where they're not, able to access polls as quickly. So I think that there's something that we're not completely seeing in the polls related to that. But at the same time, I think the ability of the polls to reach more people is creating complexities for how they depict the data, because the simple fact is that Republicans, specifically Trump voters, are extremely proud of him. They will take every opportunity to get on the phone and talk about how much they like him, or get on a text, or join a forum, or anything that will really further their cause. They're an extremely vocal minority of voters when you look at, the registration balances. And they are effectively swaying the polls in a way because they answer them regularly. That's my hypothesis.
So
where
they
ads
know
are being
more,
reached more often, they're doing a bad job of answering polls. Sorry.
So no longer the shy voter then.
No, I don't think they're so shy. I think that they were shy in 2016 in part because there was a lot of social stigma about Trump, but I think that really the change was not in attitude, but in the fact that they're now in the models, right? They have been since 2020.
That makes a good deal of sense. Cam, we still have you for about 15 more minutes here. Jeff, I know that we want to talk about the swing states, and you have some questions for Cameron with respect to those swing states, all 7 of them.
Sure. Let's go through them. I think, would you be comfortable saying that it looks as though Georgia, based on the current polling and the current numbers, appears to be a pretty solid leaning red at this point? Is that?
I would say so. And based on Trump's activity over the past year, the state infrastructure, they all value their security. And I don't think that access to the polls is going to be extremely forthcoming under recent laws they passed. So I'd say that it's pretty solidly in the red category in my map.
Okay, so let's go out west then with Arizona and Nevada. They both appear to be leaning right now towards Trump. I'm surprised about Nevada, quite frankly, but what's your take on both of those states?
I don't know if I would write off Nevada. A lot of the aggregators I'm looking at have it as even or leaning Democrat, and I think that that'll play out ultimately. I think that something we're neglecting to talk about here is actually up ballot coattails, which don't occur that often, but I think they're particularly strong in both of these states. Jackie Rosen is running really well, and Rubin in Arizona actually is a really strong candidate. I think that their turnout operations are going to do an excellent job of getting people to the polls, and might even prove a surprise in Arizona, which doesn't look like it's going to do so well. But that was another surprise for us in 2020. It's going to be razor thin, whichever way it goes.
And then North Carolina?
I keep thinking we're going to win it, but we never do. In recent years, it's been tough. I don't think that one's going to play out so well for Democrats this time. I think that you have a really strong Trump contingent there. There's always a chance, but
Scott,
and the Mark Robinson scandals having no reverse coattails effect?
No, I think that Trump has done a great job of distancing himself from that. And honestly, it probably neutralizes some of the reverse coattails of the governor, in fact, because people now feel like they don't have to, make a straight ballot choice. But that's really just a random hypothesis from me. I don't know if it bears out in the data, but
sure.
When we had Robert Cahaly on from Trafalgar, one of the interesting takeaways was his impression that North Carolina was a key state for Trump, that he could not have a path to victory without it.
That's true.
Are you of that opinion as well?
Absolutely. He needs that. If North Carolina doesn't come through for him, then, Harris has the opportunity to lose Pennsylvania or Michigan, depending on how you look at it. And those are big concerns.
So let's walk over to the blue wall then. How do you handicap each one of those states right now?
Wisconsin, I'm surprised, has been rated as a swing state. Honestly, I'm surprised that it was even considered that way, but I am concerned about how the polls are moving in Wisconsin. You'd be surprised to see it getting so close. It wasn't like that, even a month ago, if I recall. Overall, I think, Michigan is a big question mark right now. You have really an unheard contingent of people who are extremely concerned about the conflict between Israel and Gaza, and it's going to affect the election in a way that we can't really predict. And if I were to countenance the Harris campaign is, do everything you can in Michigan, which they obviously are, but have a backup strategy, right? There isn't one for Pennsylvania. It's too valuable for the most part, unless you were to somehow win North Carolina.
And what can you tell us about the history of ticket splitting in both Michigan and Wisconsin? Because with Tester, well, no, that's Montana. In Wisconsin, it's Baldwin, right? So with Baldwin running what is now suddenly a close race against Eric Hovde, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm surprised by that. So what will be the tail wagging the dog in those states? Will it be the Senate race or the top of the ticket?
I think that Baldwin has, a tried and true turnout operation. She's been through this many times before. And while it's getting closer for her, I'm not super read up on her opponent, but I don't anticipate her losing her seat. And when it comes to Michigan, I think that, this is an open opportunity. And I think that generally gins up excitement, which typically leads to higher turnout, which benefits Democrats. But again, I think that there's such a unprecedented kind of, leave the ballot blank kind of movement that's occurred. And I do think it was mildly exacerbated by some of the programming of the convention, just because people put a lot of emphasis on it, though I'll say for the record that I thought the convention did the best they could with the situation. But I think that where the convention was located in such close proximity to those key voters really exacerbated the tensions there in an already really aggravated community when it comes to the administration's handling of Israel and Gaza.
Jeff, I think we got to go to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Keystone State. Well, you've got some,
former home state.
You have some roots there, Cam. So tell us what you're hearing out of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, well, what I personally feel is, I used to know Josh Shapiro, actually. He was one of the nicest people I interacted with in my political career, and that still remains.
So was it a mistake to pass on Josh Shapiro?
Well, I think that ultimately what the vice president, considered when she chose her nominee was right for her and probably right for the country. But the thing is that Josh Shapiro would have really delivered Pennsylvania. I mean, he's pretty darn popular. He knows how to message to them. And, on top of that, he is absolutely smooth. I remember seeing him when he was in the primary for state attorney general in 2016 and thinking, this is not as high as he goes. Boy, was I right. So he is really excellent. He's a strong messenger. He's a fantastic surrogate. I think that he would have actually turned the vice presidential debate into a bit of a bump for Harris, where there kind of was one with Walz, but I do feel that his performance wasn't exactly invigorating in comparison to what Shapiro would have given, which would have been very similar to Vance's style of delivery. All the same, I think that the Keystone State, would have really benefited from the governor there. I do think there are reverse coattails in that situation as well. I was actually an intern for Bob Casey in the Senate way back when, and I'll say that the Caseys are about as popular in Pennsylvania as the Kennedys are in Massachusetts. And so him being on the ballot is a great sign.
Well, he's up against hedge fund money. Dave McCormick, I think, is a Republican candidate. He's a hedge fund manager. Yeah, is that race still a toss-up in your opinion?
Well, I'm sure you saw Bob McCormick recently in Connecticut, Chris, because that is where he lives.
Maybe it's another.
I'm not even.
Who ran against Fetterman, Dr. Oz, right?
No,
maybe it's another
I'm not
Dr. Oz
even
situation.
Yeah, my fiance is from New Canaan, Connecticut, and he really doesn't live there. I really don't think he has, a snowball's chance. It's just, it's very hard for him to make a connection there. I think also, while the Pennsylvania State Party, varies in terms of its efficacy, I think that it is particularly strong when leveraged by its top of the ticket nominees. I mean, their campaign finance rules are somewhat unique, and they allow for a lot of spending that, gets you into a stronger position. All of that said, it is very hard to tell how Pennsylvania will ultimately turn out. It's going to be extremely close. I think that there are big concerns about voter intimidation there too. You've seen pronounced efforts by Trump supporters in Pennsylvania to intimidate folks. I actually go out of my way as a former opposition researcher, a fact checker for the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate watch blog which tracks militant white nationalists, I regularly actually browse the current iteration of the Donald, and you see a lot of people gearing up specifically in Pennsylvania to go to the polls and make it known that everyone in the community is being watched right now. And I don't think you see that as powerfully in other states.
Jeff, I want to rip up the script here at the end for a second, because Cameron said something really interesting to me in our pre-talk about whether or not replacing Biden was a mistake or not. Cam, Pennsylvania is a lot closer than it would have been otherwise had a son of Scranton bet on the ticket. Although Pennsylvania is coming back in, right now we have it up here on the screen, odds are 57-43 in terms of poly market. That's a little bit in from when they were 63-39 back on October 22nd, 2 days ago. But what has the polling done? Did Democrats make a mistake getting rid of Biden?
Personally, I think so. And my issue is not with Kamala Harris. I think she's done a fantastic job with what she's been handed. But, the thing is that for about 12 years now, we've been in a place where Joe Biden has been consistently the best polling nominee against Donald Trump. I mean, day one after 2016, people started polling prospective Biden matchups, and he was looking really good. And, you look around primary season and potential, alternatives, though you have a name recognition issue. I think even adjusting for that, he was often the best choice against Donald Trump. And will Kamala Harris continue to poll better nationally than Biden would? I think that's definitely true. She's going to get way more Democrats in California and New Jersey to turn out, and none of them translate to electoral votes. I mean, I'm sure you're reading the Silver Bulletin, and, he has Kamala Harris ahead in the national popular vote, but that doesn't determine who becomes president. He regularly editorializes that the Electoral College is going to be tougher. 538, which uses a very similar model to Silver, but actually goes into detail on the states, indicates that, there's a serious issue for Harris in terms of her ability to win the Electoral College. And a lot of it has to do with Pennsylvania. And, surprisingly, Biden was also substantially ahead in Michigan when he dropped out. From what I recall, last aggregate average I saw for Biden in Michigan was like +5, +6. And, that wasn't including a lot of the more partisan polls. But I think that he had a really strong brand in both of those places. Pennsylvania, obviously, but Michigan, too. I think that he has a lot of sway with the auto workers in particular, who are inclined to vote for Trump in some cases, but walking the picket line with them and, being consistently in favor of infrastructure. The voters don't really associate Kamala Harris with infrastructure week, and that's not her fault. It's just Joe Biden's brand.
It's a good point that 2/3 of the blue wall Biden has a lot of gravitas with. It's an interesting observation. In today's Luckbox letter, which is free at getluckbox.com, we always mention, we talked about the unknowns for each candidate that might move the needle. There's not a lot of needle room left, right? We've got 11 days till the election. Yeah. There's been a lot of early voting. We identified Trump's appearance on Joe Rogan tomorrow, because it's Trump speaking extemporaneously for 2 to 3 hours. Who knows what will come out of that? And we identified some of the geopolitical uncertainty right now with North Korean troops joining Russian forces, potentially in the battle against Ukraine, and what is likely still to be an imminent attack by Israel on Iran that might call back into question the overall Biden-Harris foreign policy. What do you think the two potential October surprises in this declining window might be?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I don't think there's much that Trump can say, especially on a forum like Joe Rogan, that's really going to change the needle for him. I mean, he said just about everything that we consider conventionally bad. But what I do think could be problematic for him is you should go back, and I was a Trump media monitor for, a couple of years there, looking at his entire career as well as his presidency. One of the most powerful shifts in tone in his White House was when he was in front of people who had issues with gun violence and asked to, be in favor of universal background checks. He starts going wildly off message because he wants to please whoever he is currently in front of, unless they're already obviously hostile to him. So if he thinks he can win you over, he'll give you whatever he can. And the thing is that if Donald Trump gets in front of an audience where he expresses something that is deeply offensive to evangelical Christians, or he goes in front of someone and says, yeah, we need to have stronger gun laws, then, that could be a serious problem for him. It's not the kind of October surprise you think, but if you look back to moments where he's veered seriously off message on the far right, that creates a considerable drag for him. So, I would just consider that as you watch Donald Trump. If he needs to make someone happy, he's going to do what he can, and that could actually be the October surprise for him that depresses his own base as turnout, because the people against him are pretty much against him at this point. There's no one who's teetering based on his character. For Kamala Harris, I think it's anything that the media will play. I really think that if they were just to write one item from her policy platform, let's say, alleviation of student debt, and just reframe it as Harris comes out with sweeping proposal to put taxpayer money toward private, college educations, that could tank her the next day. People are very willing to get at the Democrat in the race. If there were to be, I think that anyone with Oppo has dropped it at this point. October 1st is probably the limit for that. You're not going to see anything along those lines. I mean, short of James Comey announcing, additional investigation into Hillary Clinton, which I do think cost her that election just because of how close it was, you're not really going to see major tectonic shifts. So if there were some sort of corruption issue for Harris, or I think potentially something related to immigration, which is how they've sought to brand her, and the American population has moved very far to the right on immigration as an issue, that could be a problem.